Okay, here is our first example that we're going to be solving. That's a system of 3 variables. So I want to point out that this matrix represents the system 3x plus 1y minus 2z equals 11, 1x minus 3y plus 2z equals negative 1, 4x minus 13y plus 8z equals negative 7. So when we have our answer, it will be the solution to that system of equations. So remember that we want to be working towards our goal form, which is essentially the same as it was in the last learning module. We want ones along the principal diagonal, zeros everywhere else on the coefficient side, and some column of constants on the, some column of constants on the constant side. So it is the same as it was last time, although it's a little bit bigger since we're working with a bigger system. And again, same as last time, we're going to work one column at a time. We're going to get the 1 in each column wherever it needs to be. And then we will get the zeros in that same column before we move on to the next column. So we're not going to get all the ones. We'll get one, we'll get a 1 and then the zeros. The 1 and then the zeros. The 1 and then the zeros. We don't have to go in order with the columns, but that's sort of what we'll default to. So now let's look at our first column. I could get my 1 by multiplying everything in this first row by 1/3. Remember, you're not allowed to divide. If you want to accomplish division, you multiply by the reciprocal. And that would work. However, it would mean I would need to deal with some fractions of 1/3, negative 2/3, and 11/3, which maybe makes my life harder than it needs to be, because I can get this 1 by just swapping these two rows. So my first row operation is going to be row 1 swapped with row 2. So 1, negative 3, 2, negative 1. That's now my first row. My second row is 3, 1, negative 2, negative, 3, 1, negative 2, 11. It is easy to make a copying mistake, so be careful of that. And then finally, I'm going to recopy row 3 just how it is. 4, negative 13, 8, negative 7. Draw my line between my two parts. All right, so I have my 1 where I need it in the first column. Now I want to get my 0. So I'm going to get, first I'm going to change the 3 into a 0, and then I'll do the 4. You can do this all at the same time. I find that people that are not very, very confident tend to make mistakes when they're doing more than one row at once. So I recommend taking one row at a time. So my first little mini goal is to change the 3 into a 0. The way to do that, like we talked about last time, is to add a negative 3, because that's the opposite of 3. So I take my first row, multiply it by negative 3, add that to the second row, and store that in the second row. That means that that 3 is going to be replaced by a 0. And I want to point out the reason that I'm using row 1 is because that's where the 1 is. Negative 3 times 1 will be the negative 3 that I need to make this a 0. So let's actually perform that row operation. First, I'm going to recopy my first row. Now, I'm going to perform the row operation. So negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, plus 1 is 10. Negative 3 times positive 2 is negative 6, plus negative 2 is negative 8. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3, plus 11 is 14. All right, so there is my new row 2, and I'm going to recopy row 3 just as it is. All right, now I want to get this 4 to be a 0. So my next step will be negative 4 times row 1, because that's where the 1 is, plus row 3, because that's where the 4 is, and I'm storing that in row 3. So now I get to recopy my first 2 rows. And now I'm going to perform the row operation. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, plus 4 is 0. Negative 4 times negative 3 plus negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12, plus negative 13 is negative 1. Negative 4 times positive 2 is negative 8, plus 8 is 0. So negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4, plus negative 7 is negative 3. All right. So that is my first column is now perfect. So I'm going to turn my attention to my second column. I can turn this 10 into a 1, because that's where I want my 1 to be, that as according to my goal form up here. I can turn that into a 1 by multiplying by 1/10. And as far as multiplying by fractions go, that multiplying by 1/10 is gives you some nice clean decimals. You can keep things in decimals. When you're doing these, you never ever want to round. That will end up giving you errors at the end. Rounding error will has a tendency to magnify sometimes. But that would work with tenths. However, I actually have this last row looks pretty much like I want my row 2 to look. Notice that if I swap these 2 rows, I won't be messing up anything about column 1 because both of these are zeros. So that's kind of nice. So what I'm going to do next is swap rows 2 and rows 3. I'm going to recopy row 1 since that doesn't change. Now row 3 becomes row 2, and row 2 becomes row 3. I'm going to double check that I copied that correctly. Now all I need to do is multiply by a negative 1. Multiply row 2 by a negative 1, which is about as easy as multiplication gets. So negative 1 times 0 is 0. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Negative 1 times 0 is 0. Negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3. And I recopy row 3. All right, now I'm going to shift my paper up. I don't have the goal form on camera anymore, but remember that both of these positions need to be zeros. So 3, if I want to get rid of this negative 3, if I want to change it to a 0, I need to add 3. So I'm going to do 3 times row 2 this time. The reason I'm multiplying 3 times row 2 is that's where the 1 is. That will give me the 3 that I can then add to the negative 3. And so it's 3 times row 2 plus row 1, because that's where my negative 3 is, and I'm storing that in row 1. So now 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. That's one of the reasons it's really important to get your zeros in the same column right after getting your 1. That way, when you do another step like this, you're not going to mess up your existing 1 because you'll always be adding 0 to it. All right, so on to this column. 3 times 1 is 3, plus negative 3 is 0. That's why we chose this step. 3 times 0 is 0, plus 2 is 2. And 3 times 3 is 9, plus negative 1 is 8. Then I can recopy my other 2 rows. I want to get rid of this 10 next. I want to change that to a 0. So I do negative 10 times row 2, because that's where the 1 is, plus row 3. I want to store that in row 3. So I can recopy my first 2 rows, because the only row that's changing is row 3. And negative 10 times 0 is 0, plus 0 is 0. Negative 10 times 1 is negative 10, plus 10 is 0. That's why we chose this step. Negative 10 times 0 is 0, plus is negative 8. Then the negative 10 times positive 3 is a negative 30. Plus 14 is negative 16. All right, so now we have 2 perfect columns. 2 perfect columns here. We need to work on column 3. So I need to get my 1 where this negative 8 is first. I'm going to do that by multiplying by negative 1/8. So negative 1/8 times row 3, and I'll store that in row 3. So I'm going to recopy my first 2 rows since they don't change. All right, and 0, well, and I already wrote these, but 0 times negative 1/8, 0 times anything is going to be 0, so those are nice and easy to do. Negative 8 times negative 1/8, those are reciprocals, and so that's equal to 1. And negative 16 times negative 1/8 is going to be positive 2. All right, I'm almost done. Sort of out of paper here, so I'm going to shift around. I'm going to recopy this just because it can be difficult to follow work from the bottom of the page to the top. So this is just recopying the same exact matrix. I'm not doing any operations here. All right. And now I want, if I shift a little more, then I can see my goal form. So notice my matrix is almost perfect on the coefficient side here. I just need to turn this 2 into a 0. The way that I'll do that is by adding a negative 2. So negative 2 times row 3. I'm choosing row 3 because that's where the 1 is. Plus row 1. And I store this in row 1. All right, so now these first 2 calculations are going to be easy because that's 0. So negative 2 times 0 is 0, plus this doesn't change. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, plus that doesn't change. So now negative 2 times 1 is negative 2, plus 2 is 0. That's why we chose that operation. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4, plus 8 is positive 4. And now I can recopy my other two rows. All right, and now this matrix represents the system of equations 1x plus 0y plus 0z equals 4. That means x equals 4. 0x plus 1y plus 0z equals 3. That means y equals 3. 0x plus 0y plus 1z equals 2. That means z equals 2. So that gives us the three-dimensional point 4, 3, 2. And when you are solving a system with 3 variables, your answer will be something in 3 dimensions. So if you have a single solution, you'll have a single point in 3 dimensions. So there are 3 coordinates there. So that's it for this example. We'll do another example in the next video.